Yeah, we are live. Yeah, we are live. బుక్ రీడర్స్ క్లబ్ మెంబర్స్ అందరికీ స్వాగతం. మన తదుపరి సంచిక నవలాసవంతుల భాగంగా ఈరోజు సుధాకర్ గారు యాంటీ ఫ్రజైల్ అనే పుస్తకం మీద మాట్లాడతారు. సుధాకర్ గారు ఉస్మానియా ఇంజనీరింగ్ కళాశాల నుండి ఇంజనీరింగ్లో పట్టభద్రులు, తర్వాత ఐఐఎం బెంగళూరు నుంచి ఎంబీఏ చేశారు. ఇక్ఫై గ్రూప్కి బ్రాండింగ్ డైరెక్టర్గా ప్రస్తుతం పనిచేస్తున్నారు. దాదాపు 20 పైగా స్టార్టప్స్కి మెంటార్గా, బ్రాండింగ్ కన్సల్టెంట్గా, ఎడ్యుకేషన్ రంగంలో చాలా చురుకుగా ఉన్న సుధాకర్ రావు గారు థాలబ్ రాసిన యాంటీ ఫ్రజైల్ అనే పుస్తకంను ఈరోజు పరిచయం చేస్తారు. ఇది కొద్దిగా క్లిష్టమైన సబ్జెక్టే మనందరికీ అర్థం చేసుకోవడానికి, కానీ చాలా ఇంట్రెస్టింగ్ సబ్జెక్టు. మనం మామూలుగా నవలా స్రవంతిలో మనం చూస్తున్న సాహిత్యం కానీ నాన్ ఫిక్షన్కు భిన్నంగా కొంత పాత్ బ్రేకింగ్ కైండ్ ఆఫ్ పుస్తకం ఇది. ఈ నికోలస్ తాలెబు మనకు ఇంతకుముందు కూడా పరిచయమే. బ్లాక్ స్వాన్ అని, ఫూల్డ్ బై ర్యాండమ్నెస్ అని పాత్ బ్రేకింగ్ నవల్స్ రాశాడు. వెరీ ఎకనోక్లాస్టిక్ ఆథర్ తను. సో ఆయన లేటెస్ట్ పుస్తకం తాలెబు కూడా ఈ యాంటీ ఫ్రజైల్ పుస్తకం కూడా చాలా ప్రఖ్యాతి పొందింది. ఆల్మోస్ట్ వన్ ఆఫ్ ది బెస్ట్ సెల్లర్స్ ఫర్ 2-3 years ఇన్ ఇంటర్నేషనల్ మార్కెట్. సో ఇప్పుడు సుధాకర్ గారు మనకు దాన్ని పరిచయం చేస్తారు. యాంటీ ఫ్రజైల్ అంటే ఏంది, దానిలో ఉన్న వివిధ కాన్సెప్ట్స్ను వీలైనంత సరళంగా మనందరికీ అర్థమయ్యేటట్టు తను చెప్తారు. సుధాకర్ గారు, ఓవర్ టు యు.
నమస్కారం. మన బుక్ రీడర్స్ క్లబ్లో ఉన్న సభ్యులందరికీ ఈరోజు ఈ అవకాశం ఇచ్చిన శ్రీశైల్ రెడ్డి గారు, అలాగే పడాల గారు, ఏదో ఒక బుక్ పరిచయం చేద్దామని అనుకున్నప్పుడు నేను నా చెయ్యి ఎత్తానమాట. అప్పుడు మీరు ఈ బుక్ పరిచయం చేయొచ్చు అని వాళ్ళు పర్మిషన్ ఇస్తే తొందరగా బుక్ చదివేసి బుక్ మీద కొంచెం తర్జన పడి ఆ బుక్ని ఈరోజు ప్రజెంట్ చేయాలని ఒక చిన్న ప్రయత్నం చేస్తున్నాను. సో you will have to excuse me because very frequently or predominantly I'll be speaking English, and I will try and speak and give some examples in Telugu. It is not to assume that people won't understand English, but it is to hide my inability to speak in Telugu. I think that is a bigger reason why I am sticking to this one. So this book is a very difficult book to read. Very difficult book to read, very difficult book to actually present and share and talk. But however, I will try my best in order to have continuity, in order to have some kind of attention. We will go over the book very, very carefully. I have a presentation to share, and then on and off, we will use some slides. So the book actually is this one. It's a very bulky book with seven books inside one book, and spanning across 25 chapters, and it's covered in roughly about 510 pages. So it's a voluminous book and not very easy to read. Volume is not a problem, but given the concepts and the style of writing and the subject itself, it is demanding some kind of patience, some kind of zeal to actually read the book. But the concepts are path-breaking. Padala garu cheppinattu manchi kottadhanam unna subject idi. So danni careful ga slide by slide nenu present chestanu ippudu. So permit me to share my screen. Yeah. So this is Taleb's Anti-Fragile. In the past, he has written at least 4 books that I know of: The Black Swan, Skin in the Game, Bed of Procrustes. It's actually aphorisms. Another one, which is a significant one, was Fooled by Randomness. So these are the 4 books, and today we will know a little bit to honor the author. He's a Lebanese-American essayist and mathematical statistician, option trader, risk analyst, who dealt with issues like randomness, probability, and uncertainty. 2007 book, The Black Swan, was described as one of the 12 most influential books since World War II. And then he went on to write other books. He's a professor at several universities, serving as a distinguished professor of risk engineering in New York University Tandon School of Engineering since 2008. He has been a co-editor-in-chief of academic journal Risk and Decision Analysis since September 2014. He's a big practitioner of mathematical finance, a hedge fund manager, and a derivatives trader, and is currently listed as a scientific advisor at Universa Investments. So this is the background of the author. And this is the book, as I mentioned, Anti-Fragile. This is what we are going to talk about. There are several chapters, several books within the book. So some of the important concepts I have picked up, and they go under the headings which are given in this word cloud. He takes various mythological examples to drive his point. The Streisand effect, Birdian's donkey, or Damocles, Phoenix, Hydra, so on and so forth. We'll see all these things one by one. Just to explain what is anti-fragile, a glass basically, if you drop a glass, it will break. Kinda padda glass eppudaina pagilipotundi. This is called fragile items. Robust is something, even if you apply pressure or apply some kind of tension, it will remain as it is, like a locker. A strong iron locker will remain like that if you apply pressure. That is called robust. But anti-fragile is something, if you apply pressure, it will grow. In this case, based on the requirements, it will mutate and it will grow. It will become a stronger organism. So that is called anti-fragile. Glass example I have already given. Similarly, the locker example I have given. The way people have, the way organisms' lives have mutated when there's a requirement, that is something very, very interesting for us to see. So that is the benefit of tension, and that is called anti-fragile. So the framework will run like this: what is fragile, what is robust, and what is anti-fragile. And then several examples are given to explain first the concept. Suppose there is a pressure coming and what it breaks, as in the first top diagram you can see, it is fragile. Resilient or robust is something which will withstand. It will allow something to pass through it, but it will not break. It will make a hole and go ahead, but the whole structure will remain as it is. But if you throw something at an object which multiplies its own original self, then it is anti-fragile. I'll give an example. If you do a lot of exercise to your muscles, it will grow. That is anti-fragile. If you put your brain through a lot of exercises, train through brain exercises, then the brain will grow, its functioning will grow. So that is also anti-fragile. Brain is anti-fragile. And again, that is applied to time. Depending on your attitude towards time, either you are anti-fragile or robust or fragile. And there are several examples. For example, here I want to just take a small break from the slide. People like me who are working in an organization, I work for a salary, for example. According to the author, Taleb, he says I am quite fragile. If I lose my job, I don't know how to survive. Compared to me, suppose there is an entrepreneur like Padalagaru. He works for himself and he has the habit of taking shocks, small shocks. So he gets used to the variations, he gets used to difficulties, he gets used to pains, and therefore he's more anti-fragile compared to Sudhakar, who is more fragile. I think that is the example which the author is trying to help us understand. Now, there are several examples, but we can skip those things. And also in literature, there's an interesting example in literature. If it is an ebook, it is fragile. That's what the author says. And if it's a book like this one, it is robust. If it is oral traditions where a lot of knowledge is passed on, like our Upanishads, for example, he says is anti-fragile. Or the power of the idea, which is not merely captured in a book, but it stays with people, is something which will remain immortal. And probably that is what he says is anti-fragile. Now, I take this example, so I'll take very, very quickly. Manandram Vinuntamu, Damocles, sword of Damocles, and he is actually eating the food while the sword is hanging on his head. ఏదైనా చిన్న ప్రాబ్లం వచ్చి ఆ స్వర్డ్ అంటే ఆ స్ట్రింగ్ ఏదైతే అటాచ్ చేస్తున్నదో ఆ స్ట్రింగ్ కొంచెం ఇబ్బంది అయినప్పుడు దట్ స్వర్డ్ విల్ ఫాల్ ఆన్ హిమ్. సో దట్ ఈస్ టోటల్లీ ఫ్రెజైల్. సో Damocles is totally fragile. Phoenix మనకు తెలుసు, ఇట్స్ a bird. It dies and is reborn from its ashes. There's no death to it, but it is robust. It always returns to its original form. What was its original form? It will come back to it. But Hydra is something that is another mythological serpent. It's a Greek mythology, I think, Greek or Roman mythology, which demonstrates anti-fragility. When you cut off its head, it will come back with two heads. So it benefits with that action or stress or negativity on it, and then it bounces back with two heads. So that is anti-fragile. So Damocles is fragile, Phoenix is robust, and Hydra is anti-fragile. Yes, I give the example of lifting the weight. When you lift the weight, your body gets used to lifting bigger weights next time or heavier weights next time. There is a lot of in daily life also we'll see, suppose you criticize somebody or some thought too much, or you suppress something too much, they will bounce back. I think this is called Streisand effect, according to the author. And he says, he gives the example of Ayn Rand. Despite her aggressive detractors, despite her people who have criticized her very, very severely, she has become extremely popular. So it will lead to proliferation. ఆ ఐడియా కానీ, ఆ ఐడియాలజీ కానీ, ఆ కాన్సెప్ట్ కానీ బాగా ప్రాచుర్యంలోకి రావడానికి కారణమవుతుంది. ఎక్కువగా క్రిటిసైజ్ చేసినప్పుడు, ఎక్కువ వ్యతిరేకించినప్పుడు, ఎక్కువ సప్రెస్ చేయాలనుకున్నప్పుడు, then it is called Streisand effect. There are several other examples. For example, తాలెబ్ కేసులో ఏం చేసినా కానీ అతని బుక్ సేల్ పడిపోదని అనుకుంటాడు. అంటే ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్, if he wants to try some marketing activity, even if he does something lesser in his intention to sell his book, it is not going to affect him. It is going to largely work in his favor. Supposing you are working in a bank and you are drunk in a bar and you get arrested, or traffic cops will catch you because you are doing drunken driving. That is, you are extremely fragile. Suppose there is a taxi driver who has freedom to go anywhere and is not dependent on anything like reputation or fame. He doesn't have to protect anything like that. So he's a little more robust. People who don't care how they dress, and again it looks like ఇది చదువుతున్నప్పుడల్లా ఈ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ నా గురించి ఇచ్చినట్టు, I am very, very fragile according to author. I care for my dress, I care for my reputation, I care for my colors, this, that. So I am very, very fragile. So that is the example that author is giving. Yes, people who are stuck in domain. See, people come from academics, people come from medicine, people come from pure sciences, people come from criminology, people come from legal systems. But whatever they understand, their logics in one domain will not work in other domains. That's what he's saying. Some people who take elevator to the gym to use again a stairmaster inside the gym is a logic which will not be worked. Small stresses on your, this is another fantastic example I want to share with you. Small stresses in income, small problems in relationship will help you become stronger to avoid big fights. Imagine in a relationship, husband and wife or friendship or anything, if there are no small fights, one day there will be a big fight and you won't be able to handle and you will get separated. That's what he's actually mentioning. So small negativities, small problems, small shocks, small variations are good for us to actually survive and then become stronger. This is another story which he tells. People have a tendency to put everything into the slots that they have. So he would capture travelers, వాళ్ళని పట్టుకొని ఒక ర్యాక్ లో పెట్టాలంటే వాళ్ళు పొట్టిగా ఉంటే he will stretch them, పొడవుగా ఉంటే వాళ్ళ కాళ్ళు నరికేయడం. So it is the tendency to fit everything. We destroy variations to fit into a model and we do a similar harm. Okay, so reducing variations will harm us great bit. So he's talking about variety, he's talking about diversity. It's a great application actually of a thought. There's a turkey problem. Turkey is a problem. You see here, it is again, the owner of the turkey is feeding the turkey for quite some time. And the turkey thinks that the owner is good, therefore the owner is feeding. And the point here is the absence of harm does not give you any evidence of no harm. In the sense, there's no guarantee that he will not harm. On Thanksgiving Day, he will cut and eat you. So that's called typically a turkey problem. So lack of evidence or absence of harm does not mean that there is no harm. People generally tend to believe that, yes, there is evidence that there is no harm, and then they believe that they are not going to die, or they are not going to perish, or the thought is not going to taper down. Another example is the Burdian's donkey. This is basically about decision making. So you have hay on one side and a water bucket on the other side. So the donkey is perennially struggling to decide. But randomly, without thinking, if you go to either a bucket of water or hay, it's fine. So this beneficial stressor is something randomness is going to provide. And randomness is required. You will become more anti-fragile or more robust if randomness is allowed. So that's the point, which has got wider applications again. Yeah, here is an example. Practicing poverty. For about 7-8 years back, Cochin లో we have an office there. అక్కడ ఆఫీస్లో వెళ్ళి నేను మా బాస్, అంటే నేను నెంబర్ 2. When you are number 2, you are more anti-fragile perhaps. So ఏమవుతుందంటే అక్కడికి వెళ్ళాము, we were supposed to sack the center head there. So that's the plan with which we left. So my boss executed that plan, and he told him why we are terminating that person. They terminated. You know what the other person who got terminated said to me? Because I have some freedom to talk to him. He can't talk to the number 1 who terminated him. Although I'm part of the team, I'm number 2. There is some kind of leeway. There is some kind of elasticity over there. So he came and told me, you know what? I have the ability to survive at low income, whereas you guys do not have that ability to survive at low income. I didn't understand it at that time, but slowly, as life taught lessons, I gathered and understood that, yes, the ability to live with poverty, the ability to endure pain is something which will prepare you for a shock. And sometimes you will not even understand, you will not even realize that there are actually shocks for you in life. I think that's a very, very profound practical example, which, so that is stoicism, ability to go through pain and then stand as if nothing has happened. So practicing poverty is that example which I gave you. Then there are several other examples small doses of poison. If you take, you will build immunity, just like the vaccine that they are giving. They give a small dose of vaccine to train your body to resist its stronger form. So they kill a virus, and that virus, non-live virus, is injected into you, like what we are taking currently, the COVID vaccine, especially the Covishield. So it is to train your body to, I mean, this he said long back, but that's what we are all doing. Vaccines are not new. Most of the vaccines have the same fundamental technology. So anti-fragile benefits from fasting, weightlifting, running. So when you have these beneficial stressors, like I gave the example earlier also, who has never been hungry or never exercised, don't gain at all. So yes, the lesson at least for us is to start exercising and practice intermittent fasting so that you remain robust and then stay healthy. And probably you realize what is the optimum amount of food that you are supposed to eat, or what is required for your body. And then another profound thought, very, very interesting, is that aging causes bone degradation. But the author says, and it is true, we thought aging causes bone degradation, but it seems that bone degradation causes aging. When you don't exercise, when you don't keep your bones intact, bones degrade. And when bones degrade, you age. It's not the reverse. There are a lot of people who are aged, but their bones are intact because they had taken good care of the bones by regular exercising, exposing to sun, sufficient vitamin D, so on and so forth. So lack of stress is something which deprives us this benefit. So the beneficial stressor is something which is required for us. Okay. So again, when you are put with the competition, certain schools and colleges actually practice this. You select best of the kids, best of the students through an entrance examination, and all the top guys, you pick them and put them in a college. They all come out in flying colors, in the sense they do extremely well. But if you don't have strong rivals, strong competition, then the absence of challenge can degrade anybody for that matter. So competition is another important requirement. Yes, background noise sometimes helps us to concentrate. Any Irani cave, most of us would have sat down and probably discussed many things in spite of the noise that is around us. And again, he says the human conditions one has to go through without actually taking too many medicines. The ability to grapple with the dark side should not be intervened by some medicines like antidepressants and so or mood swings that are natural. So dark side is something which we have to deal with, and naturally we need to grapple with it. That's what he suggests. Yeah, this is a very, very different and difficult thought. How do you learn the language? You learn the language from the embarrassment of not knowing things. Probably sometimes that's a trigger. That is the way some of the people, or most of the people, have learned the language, especially when they come from a different background and a different language background, basically. In fact, in my experience, I can tell you, those who came from Telugu medium background, they managed to learn English much better. Not only manage, but they also master the language in a manner that they beat all the English medium guys. I've seen it. My own father is a big example of that. He obviously came from a Telugu medium background and would any day give a run for my money. Of course, he's not alive today, but he would continue to do that if he were. So, yeah, lions in the zoo example is another very interesting thought. It's not meant to be in the zoo. Iatrogenics and naive intervention, I spoke about these things. So some of the harms caused by the doctors or healers is that there's too much of intervention. It's called naive intervention, according to him. I think more often than not, due to that intervention, the body suffers. For examples like cutting a wrong leg, or something like prescribing antidepressants medicines. So those things are avoidable, and it is a naive intervention, and it does more harm actually. The other harm is when Taleb wrote an article and he gave to Washington Post, they kept on editing it for the style. Basically, his writing style was not okay, so they kept on editing. So he took it away from them and gave to Financial Times. They just changed the date and published. What Washington Post missed is that in their attempt to do too much of editing, they missed one important factor, or the only important factor. So that's his personal example of Taleb. He says procrastination, delaying is good. For example, when the lion is attacking you, nobody procrastinates. But sometimes if you don't check your email, it's okay. I think that's not a great deal, and some delays are beneficial according to him. Yeah, agency problem. What doctor seeks from you defines what he does. It's all part of the interventionism, naive interventionism. Then other concept that he talks about is barbell and the bimodal strategy. In simple language, if you have 100 rupees, he says 90% of 90 rupees you keep in your boring cash. That means, regular cash in the bank, and 10% you invest in high risk securities. So if you avoid the middle ground of, putting 100% in medium risk kind of thing and try to take a bet there, you run a bigger risk and you might actually lose entire money. This he calls barbell. And then bimodal strategy is to have an option of, for example, you're a writer. You should also have a day job so that you can balance the randomness. The writer, it can be risky career. Your output need not be accepted. It need not be published whenever you want it to be published. Therefore, the income that you will generate from that publishing will be very, very less or uncertain. So if you have a day job, then the stability of income will match with this thing. So this bimodal strategy is something which is tough. And barbell is about, again, 90 rupees in cash and 10 rupees in high risk investment. Yes, there are many examples, but I'll skip this. Financial independence, he talks about basically the freedom of choice. If you have that optionality, it thrives on the freedom of choice, and therefore it is important to have those choices. Tinkering actually is a very good model for even consulting. People in marketing, strategy, and consulting will have to learn from this. And essentially what it means is your mind has to work on trial and error basis. And then, as I said, steam engine was a toy which the Greeks have used for amusement, and later the world realized its practical applications. So the trial and error method, even in design thinking, this has to be used, or this is being used currently. So great applications of this concept. And several times I had great discussions on this. Tinkering itself can be a business model of a consulting organization. You tinker with business models, and that is the business model of the consulting organization. So trial and error, constantly someone keeps on trying and error, trying for tweaking the models, even though there is no commission order, even though there is no definite commitment given by any client. You keep on working on it, and then you make a presentation to them, and that could be a stream in itself. Teleological fallacy, that you know exactly where you are going in the past, and the others have succeeded in the past by knowing where they were going. I think he also basically what he's trying to say is academics and teachers especially, he says that they are trying to teach birds how to fly, but birds don't understand all these things. Whatever mumbo jumbo and mathematical calculations that you make, that birds don't care. Yes, this also I'll skip. The green lumber fallacy is another very, very interesting things. You don't have to understand aerodynamics to learn to ride a bicycle. So that's one. So he gives the example of somebody who sold fresh wood, thinking that it is something else, and he thought it is logs painted green, and then he rakes in good profit. Optionality we discussed. Non-linearity. Cumulative effect of small shocks is smaller than the single effect of an equivalent shock. This is again a concept which can confuse us, but there are interesting applications, so I put it here. Non-linearity is something which we should get used to. Yes, Sometimes we solve problems by removing certain things to make it less complex. It is called via negativa. I think he labors quite a bit on explaining these things and gives a lot of examples and problems in life that one goes through. If you have more than one reasons to do a task, then you will not do it. But if you have only one reason to do it, you'll probably end up doing it. So by reducing the options or reducing the reasons to do that, you have your decision making is very, very clear over there. Now, Lindy effect is another very interesting. If a book has been in print for 100 years, it will likely continue to be read for another 100 years. But a person who has been alive for 100 years may not be alive for 100 more years. So for perishable things, it is not applicable, but for ideas and for books, yes, it is applicable. Neomania is basically, you have a fantasy or a fancy for something new always. So people they keep on buying phones every 2 years. So that is what it does. And several other examples of, how to remove via negativa examples he is giving in terms of if true wealth consists in worryless sleeping, clear conscience, reciprocal gratitude. I request your attention for this slide. Absence of envy, so on and so forth. Then it is largely subtractive. So we are actually removing certain negativities. It's called elimination of iatrogenics. So it is wealth. Yes, he also takes a position saying that if there is no skin in the game, never get on your plane if the pilot is not on board. There's no skin in the game, the flight might crash. Make sure that there is also a co-pilot so that, in case of difficulty, it is taken care of. So never ask anyone for their opinion, forecast, or recommendation. Just ask them what they have or don't have in their portfolio. So that's extremely important. Not the opinion, but what did they do or what did they gain by doing a particular line of option. Yes, there are other random thoughts, and I am now completing the slides, and then we can come for a discussion or questions. So randomness is risky. That is a bad thing. That is the basic illusion he says. But randomness is what he is recommending. It will prepare us for something bigger, and we can withstand even without noticing it. Yes, there are several personal risks that one need. The best way to verify that you are alive is by checking if you like variations. If you don't like different kinds of people from different castes, religions, backgrounds, heterogeneous people, then you are not alive. That's a very, very powerful statement, and it can be applied the way we like. And ethical life isn't so when stripped of personal risks. Somebody who doesn't have a locus standi there, or somebody who doesn't have a skin in the game there, cannot talk of ethics. So basically that will become theoretical and but not practical. Black swans, this is other book. What it talks about is highly improbable and consequential events like World War or the invention of internet. They are actually not predictable, but it will have sweeping, far-reaching implications because of that event. That is called black swan events. Positive black swan events, negative black swan events, both are there. And human beings generally have a liking for cause and effect. They create a narrative on the world, and it is impossible to calculate the risks of black swan events or predict their occurrence. In spite of our life, I'm a person who likes order. I like methodology. I like structured thinking. I'm actually very, very fragile. I have a business partner or a friend who says he comes from the creative world. He reads more of not anti-fragile things, but he reads fiction. He can write fiction and he can read fiction. I can't read fiction. That's a problem with me. And he can deal with a lot of loose ends. He can deal with a lot of disorder, whereas I dislike disorder. But the model here is two such people should come together in an organization to create a very long-lasting and strong impact to the decisions that they make or to the work that they create. So all kinds of people are there, but I think we need to identify our strengths and weaknesses and try for complementing roles and responsibilities to build an organization or work on a common purpose. Black swan effects necessarily are increasing as a result of complexity. It is bound to increase. Interdependence between parts, globalization, and the craze for efficiency. Because of all these things, black swan effects are increasing, and we need to learn to live in this kind of world. That is the overall essence of the book. How do we live in a world that we don't know, the world that is uncertain? How do we gain from disorder? These are the far-reaching concepts that he's talking about. If you, from a top-down effect, if you want to be like an overprotective parent, it will not work. We are not going to teach our own kids to live in volatile world that we are living in. If you do a top-down approach, like a parent, like a helicopter parent, for example, over-treatment of illness or physical problems can lead to medical error. For the sake of stability, I mean, if America had supported certain dictatorial regimes for the sake of stability outside their country, in other countries like Asia or somewhere, then there will be chaos after revolution. So I think one should slowly learn and understand in various forms of life, in politics, business, technology, parenting, learning, and career choices. We need to allow randomness and little bit of disorder we should get used to, and variation that we should live with and appreciate to live with. So that is what he's talking. And also on entrepreneurship, the application is on entrepreneurship. If you take bimodal risk profile, that is, you take a day job and be a writer, and then you make sure that you're comfortable with absolute worst case, but then pursue a few big bets, and that approach is better than being a medium risk in everything. So he also goes on to say that entrepreneurs should have worked on a day job little before actually getting into full-time entrepreneurship, so that they understand both the worlds. Yes, we spoke about this. The statistical evidence of benefits from applying ice to his nose. He went to an emergency ward. He had a broken nose, and they were trying to apply nose. And then he asked them, "Is there any statistical evidence of benefits from applying his nose, or you are simply doing it because it is part of your naive interventionism?" So, because the human need to do something, and doctors also do that sometimes, even if they don't know the cure. I am told on his homepage, he said, "Please refrain from offering honorary degrees, awards, listings in 100 most or best-selling authors or best-selling books, and similar debasements of knowledge that turn it into a spectator sport." So it talks about the author's personality of actually not liking some of these things, and he doesn't want to reduce it to a spectator sport. Yeah, this is another example which I will skip. But one thing is, there are many negativities in the book. It's not widely uniformly applicable given the concept and the way he writes also. Looks like he is a person who likes contentions and controversies. But my personal reading of the book is that he purposefully kept it like that by randomly discussing so many things, and by design keeping it conflicting sometimes, so that the book becomes popular. I think that he did it purposefully, not because he had no control on it. So that is the reason. See, if everything is good about the book, that's what some books are. But if you have the ability to separate the wheat from the chaff, that's what we are supposed to have, then we take the good from this book, which is largely fine, sweeping definitions, at least aspirational. Anti-Fragile is aspirational. It is practical in some of the occasions, and it is not practical in most of the occasions. Then we need to take whatever is something which we can do, and the negative parts or the flaws or the blatant criticism of authors, academics, and other professions like medicine and things like that, that you can keep it aside and don't comment on it. So it's a challenge to us that as a reader, we need to take what is good from a book, and other things we can. But when we talk about it, we have to put everything and say that 70% is good, 30% is not good. But then we focus on 70%, go deeper, try for applications, and go home. I think that is the way it is. He attacks, as I said, theorists and academics, so people who teach birds how to fly. Yes, this is about the entrepreneurs. He borrowed it from Adam Grant as it said in originals. Yes, that's all I have. And so it's something which I try to simplify without losing the essence of what the author has mentioned, because it's a pretty voluminous book, as I told you. And all we, as a mark of respect to the author, we need to go through all important concepts. There are many other examples, many other stories, but I think without actually tripping, we can focus on some of the things which I mentioned, and probably some of the things are not required for us. So that is what is anti-fragile. Anti-fragile is a mindset for us more than anything else. You should not be a wet noodle who succumbs to the onslaught of difficulties or variations or troubles and problems in life. Problems in life are a certainty. So how do we withstand that? Get used to handling or grappling with small problems. Don't completely eliminate problems. Don't choose a path which is completely fine for you, so that you don't train yourself, you don't equip yourself to face in case there is a bigger shock on your path. I think that is the take home message for the entire discussion that we are having today. Padala garu.
Thank you, Sudhakar Garu, for a very lucid presentation. You did it in a true academician style. I know. It's a very commendable effort, because I know how difficult it is to speak on this kind of book.
Yes.
Because myself had opened this book twice and couldn't complete for various reasons. And thank you very much for enlightening us on the various aspects. And now I learned a trick. So whatever the books list I had, couldn't read, I didn't read. So I present to you. So next time to present in a book readers club, so that I can skip that. So I have few doubts or clarifications
Please.
in terms of anti-fragile book. The first thing is the stress-on effect. That too much of criticism will lead to the popularity of that particular person. So here you mentioned about Ayn Rand.
Yeah, he mentioned Ayn Rand.
He mentioned Ayn Rand. You means he, Taleb. Okay. So can we apply the same thumb rule to Modi? Because since 2002, there was too much of criticism, and that could be one of the reasons that catapulted him to center stage.
You're bang on it. You're spot on. I'll give you two examples. See, the intelligentsia of United States of America criticized Donald Trump as orange, as something else and something else. But if you recall, Nat Silver is the only guy who predicted thumping victory for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump appealed to a particular segment which has got a latent appeal. It has got a latent value. And then he happened to be a messiah for them. And that kept on. That's called uprising. That uprising was strengthened more by the criticism of the intelligentsia rather than its own natural progression. So if you try to aggressively put down something, it will bounce back. And in case of Modi, PM Modi was not PM when he became PM, right? He was a CM. So the first instance is different. First instance, there was a great gap because of the misrule of UPA, and they came on the plank of clean governing or anti-corruption kind of a plank, and therefore he narrated very good stories about what kind of governance that one can promise, and people were ready for taking it. It was the right time. Modi's entry in the first instance was the right time, but subsequently, if the secularists or the leftists, I hate to put labels, but if these people go on a binge of or a vengeful kind of criticism, then it will definitely do good to the other side. So, but it doesn't happen. The human mind is like that. But I'll give you the counter. If there is a good strategy, and if a string of good things are done by Rahul Gandhi, and if BJP and the right-wing people and RSS people, if they try to put him down as Papu, he will bounce back and he'll become the prime minister. So this is also a possibility.
Yes, well put. Now we come to the another prime minister, PV Narasimha Rao. So
Oh,
we all know that he is a Maunamuni, and he almost mastered the art of indecision or procrastination. So how do you put him in the context of Taleb anti-fragile theories?
it's a very good question, Padala Garu. See, as Taleb has mentioned, he has allowed Prime Minister PV Narasimha Rao allowed himself the ability or the experience of absorbing small shocks. See, I will not attribute strategies to silence if it is a mere silence. But if there is some kind of action taken, and if silence is manifested in building some other strategy for, say, building a resilient India in terms of reforms, and then identifying the right person, that is, identifying the right driver to drive your bus in terms of economic reforms agenda, those things we'll appreciate. But mere silence is a lot of times we get into this fallacy. Sonia Gandhi is not talking, so therefore that silence is a strategy. If anything is happening in Andhra Pradesh, it could be because of Chandrababu Naidu, although Chandrababu Naidu is far away from those things. So that barring those fallacies, sticking to Prime Minister PV Narasimha Rao at the time, I think entire energy was conserved in handling the bigger battles. He has identified what is needed for the country. And his huge experience of being a chief minister before, being minister in the cabinet, being a politician, and being a student leader during his days, all that has very, very richly helped him to become what is called at least robust, if not anti-fragile. But from today's discussion point of view, from Talib's point of view, yes, PV Narasimha Rao is a great example because he survived the entire tenure, and he also served as the AICC president once. So I think he displayed at least reasonably good traits of being anti-fragile, and we can look at him as aspirational from that standpoint.
Now we come to the raging issue on our hands, the Corona pandemic.
Oh, yes.
So you told in one of your statements that it touched immunity and fragileness. We had seen that certain segments of our population were less touched by Corona pandemic. Is it because of unhygienic conditions that led to more immunity and more anti-fragile? Then certain segments where they had a more secure life and kind of protected life are more prone to Corona and this thing. How do you put it in Taleb words?
100%. We have these sero studies conducted in the suburban Mumbai slums. We have sero studies conducted in. I'm sure it is conducted in Hyderabad, the old city. See, what happens is during the wave 1, if a large number of them were infected, and then after overcoming that, they have built the immunity and antibodies are there, then they are less susceptible for a bigger impact caused by wave 2. At a technical level, wave 2 could be far more dangerous, and it could be Delta variant or Delta plus variant. Barring those technicalities aside, at a normal, non-complicated language, they have actually gone through this difficulty, so they become robust. And if there was a second wave, they did not get affected as much as the others got affected. So it appeared that second wave was more for middle and upper class India, whereas in to some extent at least, to an extent where the example will fit in. And then when you looked at the people like Old City, where the robustness or people over a period of time, they have developed their robustness. They had the ability to withstand the impact of the second wave. So it's a great example. I think the cue that you have given is quite fair. And at least the Bombay example fits into what you mentioned. I don't know of studies conducted in Old City in Hyderabad, but I guess it will.
A classic example.
Correct.
Hmm.
So,
You had given-
I'll tell you one more thing. My brother-in-law used to always taunt me. My brother-in-law comes from a rural background. Okay, so he worked in agriculture, in the sense he went to the farm, he lifted the plow, he tilled the land, he lifted the buckets and all. Suppose I go and do the same thing and I lift a bucket, my muscle will tear, because I have not trained my muscles to handle a heavier weight.
Correct.
And Taleb says, if you get used to handling smaller weights, then your body will expand to handling bigger weights. I think that's how you build robustness. And then you become an individual who can withstand these vagaries, these variations and shocks and difficulties. And he used to also say one thing, my brother-in-law. He says his father would do a 100 meters dash and he would compare with my father. If both of them do a 100 meters dash, who will win? So he's actually drawing from the example that you have given. The robustness is built by your own occupation, your own functional responsibility. For example, you are an accountant in an organization. You tend to look at only certain things. If you're an entrepreneur for the entire organization, you have the ability, like yourself, you have the ability of accepting zero income sometimes. With me, I told you, I told these things during the discussion also. If I have zero income on a particular month, I try to avoid zero income and I put in all ways and means how not to have zero income. But I cannot handle zero income, whereas you can handle zero income very beautifully. So your occupation gives you some robustness, your functional responsibility prepares you in a certain way. The example that we take from, it is said that when Coca-Cola was purchasing Thumbs Up, a few accountants put a price on it and they sold it for some 200 crores or something, whereas the brand was at that time valued much higher, probably 5 times more than that. If a marketing guy was to sell that brand, he would have sold it 5 times higher. Whereas from Coca-Cola's point of view, they were ready to pay any price to, their primary objective was to kill that brand, because Coca-Cola was not actually rising. So they thought another cola should not be there. But only after purchasing, they realized that, they need to fight Pepsi with Thumbs Up and then have a larger market share, which they eventually did. But yes, that's where it fits in. Occupation, functional responsibility determine our decisions, and some of the decisions are more robust and they stand the test of time.
Another example he gave was ebook, book, and oral traditions.
Yes.
You compared it with fragile, robust, and anti-fragile. I'm a little bit confused. Isn't it the other way around?
I thought so. Even I thought so. Do you think for some of the Upanishads or some of the thought processes, at least in a very simple language, if I say, which are carried forward through various generations, they stayed with us, right?
Yes.
And today you have a choice of reading, let me look at my library, Easy Money. If I don't read Easy Money 1, I can't remember Easy Money 2. I can't read Easy Money 2. So the dependence or the over-dependence on a book form and I'm reading it again and again, we are all going through that. I read Taleb again because of Padalagar. So he said, you read again. So I came to the class by reading this. So, but without reading, if you wanted me to explain, no, I cannot explain this. So this is fresh in my memory and I'm equipped with the power of the concept, and therefore I'm able to talk nicely, probably nicely. Okay.
The example you gave about Upanishad may be true because it reached certain mass, critical mass.
Yes.
Suppose what happens if through oral session, a person to person after the second person dies, it transmitted and dies.
Yes,
Along with him, that the concept it died.
correct.
So does it prove Taleb wrong?
No, see, not only this example, in various other examples, we can find such chinks in his armor. He would have thought about certain examples and it may not apply 100% also, right? That is the beauty of the book. The inbuilt conflict or the possibility of a conflict to its application is what makes it very, very interesting. Suppose there is Bible. Okay. I don't know if you have read Bible. I have read Bible and Quran. Not that I am I have not read too many books, so not that I am an authority there. But then I thought I should read and I read that book.
I hold certifications in Bible.
Very good. See, so a lot of people are using certain books or epics or religious texts as symbols now, but most of it is known to people over generations through families. It has come forward and then it is carried forward, at least even the rituals part also. Yeah. So to a large extent, it is applicable, but in certain cases, if you say the second person dies, when you do not immortalize your thought, and if the second person dies, if there is a huge catastrophe, then the thought also will perish. That is also true.
In another statement, Taleb says the uniformity is not desired.
Yes.
Even one zoologist, famous zoologist, Desmond Morris also
Yes.
Says about it that when you look at a colony of row houses, the similar designs are there. So that kills the creative part or the humans. What we are dissimilar from each other. So what is it wrong to have uniformity, or what Taleb actually advocates?
Actually, Taleb doesn't advocate anything great, which I'm going to say in other example now. What he says is uniformity will lower your expectations to handle a variation. So it's the same like handling a shock. You replace the word variation by a shock or a deviation or a difference. And then if you can get used to different people, then tomorrow, if there is any kind of eventuality, you will be able to withstand that. That is the only thing. See, everything that cookie cutter is not going to help us. Now I'll take you to a different world. This actually falls in my favorite topic called diversity. Now, diversity is something which is by nature there is diversity. Your 5 fingers are not same in size. People born to same parents are not having similar traits. They're very different. Each one of us have a different kind of orientation sometimes, in spite of the best efforts. Now, it is one not just for compassion's sake that we seek diversity, but it is a business imperative also. In organizations, you need women on the board. You need people from different backgrounds on board. And I'll give you one very, very powerful example. In the early 60s, when John F. Kennedy became the president of the United States, he took over from the previous president, and they were waging a war against Cuba. Now, Cuba is a very small country, island, and always United States treated Cuba as a holiday spot to have all their extracurricular activities. They also, of course, they got cigars, they got sugar, they got various other things. But one guy, Fidel Castro, came there and said, no, we will not support what the United States is doing. We are not going to be that. Then he said he will wage a war. Now, the president changed, and then the president has conducted a meeting, and all the generals are there. And he said, gentlemen, is everything fine? Then the general said, yes, Mr. President, everything is fine. Can we go to war? Yes, Mr. President, we can go to war. Are we going to win? Hands down, Mr. President. Now, what happened is, yes, they went to war, and then I don't want to take too much of time, but that was the most disastrous defeat that United States as a big power suffered in the hands of a small Cuba because of the tactics, because of various other things. But then where did it go wrong? It went wrong in the homogeneity of thinking and the background of those generals who sat, the 8 of them. There's a great black and white picture. All of them saying yes to the president because he's a new incumbent. If there was somebody who thought differently, if there was somebody who had a background to think differently, who had the freedom to voice that different tone, he would have said, Mr. President, I think we cannot take it easy. We need to actually test it. He would have done a design thinking application over there instead of actually taking it on directly on Cuba. Cuba had nothing to lose. Like Sudhakar, who worries about his dressing, about his appearance, about the colors and the camera and all those things, he cannot drink in a bar and then drive so that a police constable will catch him and then tomorrow it will come in newspapers. I'm very, very fragile. Cuba is not fragile. United States is hugely, hugely fragile. And Cuba survived, and therefore Cuba is anti-fragile. Fidel Castro is anti-fragile. A guerrilla tactics which killed the Air Force that came and bombed Cuba, they bombed only on the wrong planes because those planes were painted as Cuban planes and then kept aside without anything inside. They're hollow. And then people who landed by water, they were within the sea. They were killed and they were buried in the sea itself. Imagine 1,000 people who came from Guatemala and Nicaragua are beaten by the tactical soldiers of, say, 50, 100 people from Cuba. They kill them in the water itself and bury so that nobody notices. These are all tactics of war. They are the champions of anti-fragility. Whereas United States, being very, very homogeneous, being very, very non-diverse at that time, was quite fragile. Even now, United States of America is quite fragile.
So David is always anti-fragile.
Yes.
So I'm coming to the last 2 questions, Sudhakar Garu.
Yes.
One interesting observation was that remove options from decision making. Can you please throw more light on it?
To the extent I understand, these are not options. There are more reasons for you to do. For example, you want to go to market to buy X. You want to go to market to meet a girlfriend. You want to go to market to do something else. All are positive reasons. All are in your favor. You will probably not go. That's what Taleb says. If you have too many options, if you have too many reasons, not options, too many reasons to actually do it. So if you have one single reason, you will definitely go for it. For example, you want to buy your shaver. You will go to the mall and buy it. Very simple. The other thing of also meeting the girlfriend will make you buy a shaver nearby home, trim your beard carefully, and then you will go. Therefore, you will delay going to the mall. So that is the point.
Okay. Before I ask my last question, let me read some of the comments by the viewers.
Okay, please.
Sunita Ratnakaran garu, she is a professor in Delhi-based University and very voracious reader. She wrote, very well done. Thanks for such a good introduction.
Thank you, Sunita garu. Thank you very much.
And your good old friend, Uday Vagre writes, the plank was good governance and development, clear positioning.
What was the question?
He didn't question, maybe this is about on Modi, in the context of Modi.
Oh,
the plank was good governance and development, clear positioning.
Yes. That is on the first instance. He probably, what Uday was talking about is, he carried forward the plank of good governance that he did in Gujarat, and the image that he was very clean, he carried forward to Delhi. Yes, I agree with Uday, although I don't agree with him on various other topics. Yes.
Okay. He also wrote on P.V. Narasimha Rao, PVN was master of silent and strategic movements, picking up best horses for courses. The trigger and lead for free market economy and liberalization, a clear shift from protection and reticent socialism.
I would like to give a current day parallel. We may not like it, but we'll have to give the current day parallel. In politics and governance, for example, what happened in Maharashtra or in Mumbai during the wave 2, COVID wave, they gave the responsibility to Iqbal, the IAS officer. And then the chief minister told him that if anything goes wrong, it is my responsibility. And you do not look back before deciding on addressing the media. If Iqbal had the condition that he had to take permission of the chief minister to address media, then it would have been a dependent bureaucrat like anyone else. But he empowered completely. And then there what happened is, chief minister became completely silent. And then one bureaucrat who had taken on COVID with all the resources at his disposal, if they really want to do, they do a very good job. That's a great example. But here, if silence leads to some kind of strategic focus, that is what is required in a leader, strategic focus and focus on execution. We recently had a conversation with one of the top leaders from Tata's. He said, clear thinking and strategic focus. If you are worried about you yourself talking in media, sometimes when the crisis is going on, not like Prime Minister Narendra Modi, don't take that example. But here in case of Chief Minister of Maharashtra, if you have clearly given him a go-ahead and there is no burden of checking with the Chief Minister, and you also are focusing on the end result, I think that silence has resulted in some benefit. P.V. Narasimha Rao Garu's silence has benefited in having a strategic focus on economic reforms. But not everybody is silent. Even Sonia Gandhi is silent. I cannot attribute strategies to silence. That will be quite meekish.
So you have to make a difference between indecision out of confusion from the not taking a decision from the clear focus.
Correct.
So both are different.
Both are very, very different.
Srinath Raju had written, well explained Sudhakar Garu. Given the volume of the book, it would have taken great effort to make it crisp.
Yes, Srinath Garu, thank you very much for the comment, and I wish I had a flower to gift it to you right now. Thank you.
And another comment by Srinath, as much as the concept of becoming anti-fragile is applicable to individuals, are there ways described in the book to build anti-fragile organizations, especially those are better than robust organizations?
Yes, there are, but then they're all of them are not 100% applicable. Anti-fragile organizations can be built, and he has given examples, several examples he has given, where you very carefully built diverse teams. You allow them to take risks so that you are prepared for taking a bigger risk, and there is no greater eventuality, unexpected eventuality at the end of it. So organizations can definitely borrow from this, and he has also given examples. For example, there is a larger organization, and in larger organization there are departments. If you want one department to shine and do better, and later if it has to positively affect the remaining departments, then this concerned department will have to do certain things differently in terms of the composition of the people, in terms of the decision making or the agility, diversity to agility, and then that strategic focus of how do I meet the organizational objectives without actually compromising on the principles or the guiding lines that we have within the organization. You have to be aspirational, you have to be inspirational to others by taking certain decisions which others have stayed off. You don't take risks. So top management will be very, very silent in any organization. They say, they don't tell you not to do. But then if you do it, then, there is a famous example of monkeys, which I'll tell you later. If you do, then you will be taken to task. How do you manage to perform without actually getting beaten by the probability of failing in that? I think if you create a track record So you need to identify the low-hanging fruits, easily doable things, create a track record, say that success is a habit, give 3 examples, and then you will stand as a shining example to others. And once it is done, then there will be greater focus and greater freedom given to you. That freedom and autonomy is nothing but energy with which you will take a bigger risk, and then most probably you will succeed because you are quite positive and management says go ahead and do it. So you're likely to succeed. And when you do succeed, yes, organization would have caught upon contagious positivity, which is emanating from the department number 1. I think it is possible in organizations.
Extending Srinath's question, Sudhakar garu, we can take up an example of a startup, a mid-level organization, and a multinational or giant organization. Okay. So by default definition from the Taleb proposition, is it inverse ladder, like startup is anti-fragile and the mid-level organization is robust, and the multinational would be fragile?
Yes.
Can you apply in a reverse ladder?
It is. This is the example cited in the book.
Oh, okay.
This is the example actually cited in the book.
Okay.
So startups are anti-fragile. And I want to tell you that large organizations are fragile. Now I'll give you an example which we discussed recently with one of the guests on our show. And he said that the traditional business models, a serial entrepreneur is saying this, traditional business models had ROI as an important parameter to evaluate, measure, and take a decision. Whereas startups, they want to expand the base of customers, and they look at ROI or the return on investment over a period of time and not immediately. The ability to stick to that kind of working is only possible for startups. Do you think today an organization as big as yours or mine will have negative growth and they will be able to say, yes, it's okay, negative growth is fine for next 2 years? We are all having positive growth, and suddenly this year in 2022, we'll have negative growth. No, we cannot handle that. The stakeholders will not agree to it. Whereas for the startups, their stakeholders will agree. Their people in charge will agree. Their office bearers will totally agree. If they are building customer access, customer base, they will wait for the return on investment to come at a later stage. Yeah, yes, it is anti-fragile.
Are you meant to say that all the startups by default are anti-fragile?
No.
Or is it, what are the ways to make them more anti-fragile? What's the message to them?
Yes, see, the message to startups is the fact that everybody is anti-fragile is not because of their doing. I don't give a credit to any one of them. Let me be very, very rude in that. It is the nature of the business that allows you to be anti-fragile. I'm calling it anti-fragile. He doesn't know that he's anti-fragile himself. Okay. But comparing an organization, a large organization saying it is fragile and therefore it is inferior, and a startup which is anti-fragile is therefore it is superior. No, I'm not doing that. It is an example because of the stage of life. It is called stage of life example. They become anti-fragile. When they grow, they become fragile. So if the same entrepreneur is continuing, they'll become fragile, right? So Big Basket was not Big Basket in the initial days. So today Big Basket has to do a lot of stuff. And then a small startup, which is fledgling, which has got about 1,000 customers, their revenue is about 20 lakhs or 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs. They are highly anti-fragile. Their expectations will be quite commensurate with what is actually going on, and they invest in future. So the message to startups, as you asked, is that take advantage of the stage of life benefit that is there for you. Experiment now. Speak to your customer. Don't worry about the exit plan. I mean, they're always worried about the exit. They're always worried about the investor. I think they should worry more about the customer. Only when there is a customer, the investor will put money in you. Only when there is a good customer relationship, there is a guarantee of business which will come later. And only when there is business, you can think of ROIs. So yes, the lesson that they have to learn is that just because Taleb says you fall under the definition of anti-fragile, you don't think you are immortal. 98% of startups are mortal, they die, in spite of all these things. So the paradox and the reality is something which we need to deal with. And startups, as our friends, and you deal with startups, I deal with startups. The message to them is take advantage of the stage of life that you are in and keep building the customer base. And don't get carried away by any notions of anti-fragility, stroke immortality.
I'm curious to know, did Taleb prescribe any antidote from becoming robust to fragile? So anti-fragile to robust, an organization grows, becomes the midway. From robust to fragile. So did Taleb have got any remedy or antidote to stop becoming fragile from robust stage?
Yeah, this book actually lacks in giving a toolkit. If he had a co-author, he would have written it very well, actually. See,
if you didn't mention, does Sudhakar say something about this?
I take the liberty of saying this. He's a great author, he's a great statistician, and he himself takes a lot of risks. He's a hedge fund manager. He has very fleetingly and inconsistently has mentioned that organizations can move from being robust to anti-fragile. But he should have actually focused much more and did some research instead of actually giving aphorisms. So aphorisms is one kind of style, as if they are the most rational things coming from a guru or a saint. But I think a management author or a business author will have to do some kind of research and then establish the findings. In that case, one would have actually told or created a toolkit to move from. But there is a possibility of a toolkit. I think the responsibility is ours to create a toolkit. There is another book by name How the Mighty Fall. How the Mighty Fall is a book that captures several organizations in their life stories, and then after reaching a particular peak, they also are hit by the hubris that nothing is going to happen to them. They think they become invincible, and then they fundamentally lose sight of certain principles, and therefore they crush. It is written by Ramcharan, and it's based on research. So if you read together, there are lessons here. That a constant vigilance on the fact and the belief that you are not permanent, or models are not permanent. We need to change with the times. We need to build in variations. We need to build in diversity, and then keep changing. Keep trying and tweaking your business models every now and then. These are all concepts mentioned by Taleb. But if it can be very nicely channelized, it can become a toolkit for organizations that are at the stage of robust to become anti-fragile.
One more question is from Narkurti Sridhar.
Yes.
Perhaps Nokia and BlackBerry are examples of fragile corporates?
Yes. You take not just Nokia. Nokia is a very good example. We all had these great examples of how Apple has changed the music industry, how Netflix has changed the video renting industry, and how the example of car rentals has completely put behind the traditional car rentals, cab hailing versus the old car rentals. These people have actually changed with the times. They forecasted the future and tweaked their business models, and then created a huge value for the customers with lean structures, lean investments, and then their business models are essentially founded on that. So there are many examples apart from what Sridhar Garu has mentioned. I must thank him for raising this point.
Uday saying that brilliant example of Cuba versus US. Thanks much. Sets one thinking. Thanks Sudhakar garu and Padala garu for this brilliant interaction.
Uday garu, who is saying that?
Uday ultimately became your fan.
Hey, he was always my fan. I'm also his fan, actually. I like him very much. Uday himself is a warrior. So he's a great anti-fragile guy. So he's one of the true Hyderabadi, true-blood Hyderabadi warrior. So I like him. Of course, as a friend, I have to tell him that there are certain things which we all have. Sometimes we wish we don't like. But yes, thank you very much, Uday, for patiently listening to this conversation.
One last thing, Sudhakar garu. Sunita garu, we know that you are watching. Do you want to ask anything or any your kind of question to Sudhakar? Please type it. Don't know whether she isn't or not, but I can see her name here. Okay. Thank you, Sudhakar garu, for the brilliant narration and brilliant explanation of very, very, very difficult book of Talab. And almost you made Talab easy, kind of Kupuswamy made mathematics easy mode.
Thank you, Padala garu. I think the credit goes to
very
the audience for asking the right questions, and also the moderator Padala garu for asking the right questions, because I very strongly believe in something, and it is not my own statement. It is said by some great guy. You need to know what question you should ask. A right question, a brilliant question only will get a matching answer, or if not a matching answer, a suboptimal answer. But if there is no great question, there's no discussion at all. We all would have said thank you, and gone home. So I squarely put the credit back to the Book Readers Club and the office bearers, namely Srisal Reddy garu and Padala garu. And thank you very much for raising some brilliant questions. Although I don't talk on politics, you have made me get deep into it and then make some comments on some prominent political figures. I generally don't talk on politics.
But I can't help it because of the kind of example Talab gave and the propositions. Correct. So almost they are glaring in the eye. We can't help but mentioning those. Anyway, thanks a lot. And friends, we are coming up with another guest in our next episode. Please stay tuned. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Thank you all.